I'm Joe Halko, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously and strive to promote a continuum of the highest quality services to meet the needs of individuals who are at any point seeking assistance. This month's episode is titled Loneliness. Loneliness is far more than a social misfortune. It is what we say we value more than anything else. In surveys to determine the factors that contribute most to human happiness, respondents consistently rate connection to friends and families, love, intimacy, social affiliation above wealth and fame, even above their physical health. However, despite their genuine human desire to connect, millions of people are predisposed to undermine social connection. Despite their best efforts, they alienate rather than engage others. And yet, these people are no more or less attractive than anyone else. And their problem is not lack of social skill. To discuss the topic of loneliness in greater detail, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guests. And they are Samantha Thomas, Integration Project Manager, Raya Noreault, CRT Team Leader, Claire Thompson, Team Leader for the Pathways Program, and Katie Mable, Team Leader of the Children's Initial Response Team. I'd like to welcome all of you to the show this month. So, let's start with what are loneliness and social isolation, and how are they different?
Sure. So social isolation is really about a lack of social connection or a lack of relationships. Perhaps it's having infrequent social contact with others, family, friends, community members, etc. Loneliness is really a subjective emotional state, so something as an individual I might feel. And it is oftentimes the perception of social isolation, but it also can be the dissatisfaction with the difference between how many social contacts an individual wants and how many they have. It's really important to talk about the distinction because though they oftentimes go hand in hand, they don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. There are many people who have very few social connections, very few relationships, but those relationships are very rich and very valuing, and that is enough for some individuals. Other individuals might have many, many relationships, but perhaps those relationships aren't rich in the level of connection. So it's important to recognize that we're talking about two different concepts that can sometimes and oftentimes really be linked, but sometimes can be very, very separate.
And again, as with so many of the things that we do at NCSS, with what you're saying, Sam, is the fact that it's not as if it's a cookie cutter scenario where, you know, somebody's only got X amount of close friends or whatever, so that must mean Y. Everybody's different, their circumstances and what they aspire to be as a person is different.
Absolutely, and it's important for us to remember that so that we're not putting our own experience and the level of connection that we need onto someone else. It's really important to respect that difference.
So why are loneliness and social isolation so important?
They are so important because over the last couple of years, researchers have really found that when folks are feeling lonely and feeling socially isolated, they can actually have really poor health outcomes. Some research has shown that individuals who are very lonely or very socially isolated have a higher risk of poorer health behaviors, not sleeping well, maybe smoking, lack of physical activity, and those health behaviors can lead to some poorer health outcomes. Further research has also connected loneliness with coronary heart disease, with stroke, and even with how well someone recovers from breast cancer. So it's important to understand that this level, this social connection, that people might not necessarily make this link to our physical health, that link is very much there. And there's so much research out there showing that. Some of the language that we use, just in the last year or so, it's become more common and popular, is the term social determinant of health. And loneliness and social isolation are definitely strongly and widely being recognized as a really important and impactful social determinant of health. And one of the reasons that really occurs is that we are social beings, right? You mentioned at the beginning this need for connection. There's a researcher named Brene Brown who talks about, or she says that connection is why we're here. She says it gives us purpose and meaning to our lives. When we don't have that, it has a really significant impact on our overall well-being. Research has also shown that loneliness and social isolation are really, really widespread right now. Cigna is a major insurer in our country, certainly, and they've done some research looking at how lonely people are and how many people are lonely. And in their research, they found that more than half of their respondents either endorsed feeling lonely or feeling left out. Sometimes that language people can kind of make sense for people when we're talking about loneliness, that more than 50% of their respondents felt that way always or sometimes. And what we're also finding from the research is that this might actually be a really significant public health crisis as we look towards the future. How are our interactions and our level of social connection impacting us in the long run?
And what are the impacts of loneliness and social isolation? I'm having a hard time with social.
Kind of to go off of what Sam's saying, so if we look at Abraham Maslow, he came up with the very famous hierarchy of needs, of human development, of what we need as humans and what motivates us. And if we look at the basic components, a lot of people remember as the triangle, right? The pyramid. If we look at the basic components, you have food, water, shelter. And then number 3 is love and belonging. And that social interaction, that being able to engage with somebody else in those feelings are so crucial to our development, to our perception of self. We can even tie in social learning theory and how we learn certain behaviors. And so what are some of the impacts? We can look at the physical, which a lot were mentioned. It can be hormonal imbalance. It can be, it actually weakens our immune system, our ability to fight infections. It's been linked to cardiovascular disease, the inflammation around the heart, which can damage it. And on the emotional side, an increase in depression. It can affect losing, gaining weight, sleep disturbances, really kind of keeping our mind active. Like I said, a sense of self, learning from others. And it's also been linked to suicidal ideations and deaths by suicide. And here in Vermont, in 2017, there were 103 deaths by suicide, which is a large number for a small state.
Yes, it is.
We rank nationwide number 26. And it's the 8th leading cause of death here in Vermont. And to break that down, that means there is 1 death by suicide every 4 days, which is pretty astounding when you put it in that way. So really that feeling of belonging, of being able to connect to somebody is really beneficial in just so many different ways, mind, body, and everything we embody.
What's interesting about what we're talking about is so often we talk about how an individual's mental health is associated with physical health.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times somebody goes to the doctor and it's for whatever, a cold or they hurt their knee or what have you. But when you look at the full picture of an individual and the effects that circumstances have on them, so often the mental is linked to the physical, but a lot of times isn't understood, I don't believe, in that manner from a physical standpoint. So what might you notice if someone is feeling lonely or isolated?
Well, some of the things that you might notice is that that person may have low energy. They may not be very active. They can have sleep problems from not being able to sleep or to continually wake up throughout the night. Also, they may have mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety. They may suffer from panic attacks as well. And physically, they can, they can get headaches. There can be some other physical effects such as just not feeling well, having pain. They may turn to substance abuse as well. They may be negative feelings. I think we touched on that a little bit, that someone can feel hopeless or, no sense of self-worth and may consider suicide. And it may affect their diet. They may at times overeat, or they may have a loss of appetite as well and not eat enough. So there's many different warning signs, I guess, that you would look for and if you thought that someone was feeling lonely or isolated.
Now, how might you help someone who is feeling lonely or isolated?
Sure. I think it's really important to acknowledge that even before you approach someone who you suspect might be feeling lonely, that a lot of times for folks there's this real juxtaposition between feeling lonely and also feeling like it's not okay to have that feeling. And so sometimes we can really encourage people to be able to speak out about it and to connect with others just by acknowledging in ourselves that this is something that affects a lot of people and that most of us have struggled with these emotions at some point in our life. So if we can approach someone through that place of acknowledging that, yeah, this is something that we all share and that it's okay to talk about that and to name that, I think we can really help to heal sometimes the shame that sort of travels with feeling lonely and really help people to make progress. So I think that part's pretty essential. I think the next step after that really is just to take notice in your community of people that you suspect might be struggling with the issue and taking that time to smile and acknowledge them, making small talk with people that you think might be struggling with that, and getting the chance to build relationships. A lot of times it can take time to then be able to have the conversation around, I wonder if you're struggling with feeling lonely or isolated. How can I help you with that? And once we build those connections with people, then maybe we can help brainstorm different ways to find connections, whether that's through going on the internet and finding different social groups through there, or whether it's reaching out to different groups in the community.
So a lot of various ways to go about that.
And I think it's so crucial to really highlight that component of this is a shared common experience with everyone. A lot of times we have these perceived divisions amongst people, and it's really just meeting a human being where they're at, and maybe they're not ready to talk about feeling isolated or feeling lonely, that shame component. But we can talk to them about their interest. And sometimes we all at times have needed to be reminded of what we like to do or how we fit in or belong. So thank you for that.
Okay.
It reminds me of, when we talk about mental health in general and the stigma that's associated with it. This falls right under that umbrella just as much of somebody thinking, well, nobody else can feel this way. I must be different. There's something, that's so different. And to your point, it's that everybody at one, a lot of times we like to say, who in the room has never been depressed? And a hand never goes up, because I think everybody at one point or another has had an instance where they're down and they're like, But they have been able to rectify that situation with the help of others or in some fashion and never get to a point where it becomes, moderate or severe. I think we're talking about the same thing here, where some people can gradually fall into a situation that they've gone from maybe being lonely for a short period of time to it's become a way of life. And it's, I would imagine, much harder then to get through to someone and be able to engage them?
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of research. Dr. Gary Kennedy, he's a professor of psychiatry and medical director at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And he's done a lot of work, a lot of research on the elderly population. And so it's kind of that instance, maybe their spouse passes away and their friends, they lose that social connection. And what he found, he calls it compression of morbidity. And what he's finding is that individuals that are socially engaged, they actually have a longer active lifespan, meaning that they're able to stay healthier longer and not see like the debilitating effects of illness until much later in life. And it's really, there's a lot of strong evidence correlating to, an individual engaging in activities of interest with other people. So it can actually, it improves our quality of life in tremendous ways.
It made me think, Joe, when you said that everybody's been lonely at one time or another. If you remember when you were a kid and the first time you were away from your parents, and what a scary feeling that was, because you were missing your parents, or so it kind of puts into perspective how scary it really can be for someone.
I talked to someone once who we were at a gathering. There were like 400 people there, so a pretty active, huge ballroom. And yet that person confided in me and says, there's like 400 people here, and I feel as if I'm alone on an island. And I said, really? So, you kind of drill down into that. But that's a rather fascinating dynamic where somebody is in a very social situation, and they want to be there, but yet they have this sense that, it's almost like they're removed from the group, which again, I think this is where we're talking about somebody who's going through a feeling of loneliness. So, we've had several shows where we've talked about trauma and adverse childhood experiences. Is there a connection between the loneliness and trauma?
I think there certainly can be, in kind of a lot of different ways. We were just talking about folks feeling lonely in different situations, and there are many different kinds of traumas and adversities, and so somebody might have a very rich level of connection in their life, and then maybe they experience a trauma of an injury, whatever that looks like, and perhaps because of their reaction to that physical health bit, that injury, they're removed from friends and family while they heal. That can be a very, very scary time for folks. It can very much impact their mental health, being removed from folks. And so that's really important. But also, when we're talking about, you mentioned adverse childhood experiences, really early trauma, early adversity in someone's life, that can really shift how an individual engages in the world as they grow up and across the lifespan, right? So some folks who've experienced a lot of early trauma, complex trauma is a phrase that we use in our field to describe somebody who's had multiple chronic traumas. That can really impact how a person sees themselves, their sense of self-worth, how they see others, whether they feel and perceive that others are safe and that having a connection with someone else is something safe to do. And then how vulnerable someone can be. It can be very hard for somebody who's experienced really early adversity and been relationally, harmed by others, to be able to feel vulnerable. And when you think about it, I know for me, when I think about my closest and strongest relationships, I think about those are the folks that I can really be myself with and I can be vulnerable with. And so when you have this early trauma, and if it impacts you in that way and it makes it difficult, that can be really hard to develop relationships. So you're kind of set up a little bit. Your risk is a little bit higher to feel lonely or to be socially isolated. And that can kind of then really reinforce itself over time, unless you're able to get connections and reach out to services, or have folks reach out to you to help to break that and help you to heal and build resilience. And for me, when I think about loneliness, I also think about resilience, because when we talk about how we're mitigating the effects of adversity, how we're trying to prevent early adversity and build resilience, we oftentimes talk about connection and having a relationship that's buffering, you know, that,
Yes.
you know, helps to balance out maybe some of that adversity that can happen. And I think definitely that connection that we've talked about thus far about loneliness impacting physical health. We know from the ACEs study that early adversity impacts our physical health, can impact our physical health over the lifespan. And I think that helps to break down, I hope that it helps to break down some of that stigma that you talked about earlier around mental health services and supports, because we are all, you know, one being, our physical health and our mental health.
All
You
tied together.
can't pull them apart at all. And so it's really important that we're talking about that connection and loneliness, and then the ACEs really lends itself to that. We talked a little bit earlier about it being possibly a public health crisis, right? And so there are some bodies in the medical field that are recommending that primary care physicians ask their individuals, their patients, about their social connections. We know that there's a lot of talk and a lot of work going on across our country around having primary care physicians ask folks about their early adversity. And I think this is such a lovely movement towards that whole person, whole wellness. So yes, I think that they're very much, can be very much interlocked.
And I think you bring up really important aspects of, especially with complex trauma, in that, so one, we kind of have that social learning theory that, you know, it's kind of that perception was kind of reinforced by whatever happened. And, you know, unfortunately, the individual tends to carry that on, and sometimes if they're re-traumatized. And so that would lend itself to not being able to really trust, right? So trust is a huge part of a relationship, being trust to be vulnerable. And so some people have a difficulty, you know, understanding that when you have somebody who's kind of like that push-pull, but they're trying to figure out where they belong, you know, with you in that situation. And it takes remarkable courage, and you know, I really applaud individuals that, you know, continue to work through that. And yeah.
I also think, I was thinking about what Katie said about connecting, smiling at people. You know, I think about, we're talking in our community right now about how do we become trauma informed? How do we better understand how early adversity impacts individuals in our community, and how do we support everyone to do the courageous work that they have to do, you know, in their healing journey. And I think about just smiling at individuals and having this understanding and letting that change the way that you interact with people. That's like really cool culture shift stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's nice to get a smile back when you smile.
Yeah, it doesn't
Whether
take a
it's in
lot
the
to do it
grocery
either.
store or in the
Right.
bank or wherever you
Right.
are.
That is so true. Now, what is NCSS doing to increase these connections?
I really think we're doing a lot, you know, and to talk about like the mind body. So we have the integrated health. So with the behavioral health, and they're just amazing, and they're offering a lot of. They're in, you know, doctors' offices. They're there for any kind of questions. They're offering a lot of support groups within the community. You don't have to belong to NCSS. You don't have to have a mental health diagnosis. This is just really promoting wellness. We have CRT, Community Rehabilitation Treatment. So this is where you see, you know, some people call them case managers. We call them community support workers, our intensive case managers. So that community part is crucial. And the integral part of it is that we go out into the community to meet with these amazing human beings and really help people try to integrate into the community. You know, help with kind of breaking down that stigma, self-stigma, stigma that sometimes is in the community. You know, linking people to resources, offering groups. I would say the crucial component of what CRT does is really assist people in learning how to build a support network. Because we all need that sense of belonging. We also have a crisis line and mobile outreach. So if you are feeling lonely, if you are experiencing increased symptoms, or you need somebody to talk to, That's a 24/7 option. We have a crisis residence. A lot of times, one of the main things that people will write on the referral is that, Raya is starting to isolate. So we try to get in as soon as we possibly can to help people. So we offer a lot of groups and skill building, healthy relationships, all that stuff. Yeah.
So what else is NCSS doing beyond everything that Raya did, which is a lot, by the way?
That's just one part.
And can I just say one thing too, which is, and all of you have mentioned it to one degree or another, but I think one of the misnomers about our organization in general is that a lot of people think most of the work or all the work takes place within the four walls of the buildings. And the reality is 95% of the work takes place in the community, meeting people where they're at. And that could be anywhere from schools to homes to you name it. And I think that's an important piece for people to understand who have not engaged with NCSS, that we truly are community-based.
Yes.
I agree, and one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking about Raya as well is that I think sometimes folks come to our services assuming that we're going to ask them about certain things related to their mental health, and then we ask them about their physical health, and we ask if they have a doctor and if they have a dental home and how they're sleeping, and we're asking them ultimately about their overall wellness, right? And so I think that's another piece that's really important for folks to know as they're engaging with us in services, that we really want to look at you as a whole person. Our specialty is to support your mental health, and to do that, we really need to look at your whole being.
What about kids and families?
Sure. So in the children's division, we have a continuum of services that starts from families who are expecting a baby all the way up to adolescents and young adults. And so starting with our youngest clients, which would be mothers who are expecting a young one or babies, our Parent-Child Center really recognizes that this can be a very unique time in a young parent's life. And there are many different opportunities that they offer for parents to come together in the form of play groups. This allows children, obviously, to get that socialization and build connections with each other, but even more importantly, allows the parents to build connections. So an example of that is we've just launched Babies in Brunch, which is very cute.
How fun. Sounds like fun.
And this is where parents who have, I believe, a 12-month-old or younger can come to the Swanton Library once a month, and it's a play group, a chance for some social time, but also a time for parents to make those connections, because we recognize that's so important. Moving up to sort of our school-aged clients, we also recognize too, as many folks have mentioned, is that a lot of our services happen in the community. So we offer programming where children are making peer connections, where children are receiving services in the community and really building connections to community spaces. So that's another way that we're decreasing isolation and really helping folks to connect to community. And if you move up even farther on the spectrum to adolescents and young adults, we offer opportunities for young adults to come together in the form of a leadership group, to get involved in volunteer projects in their community. And also there's opportunities for adolescents to gain job skills. So they're making connections in their community in that way as well. So.
Believe it or not, our time is up. I told everyone this would go fast. I want to thank my guests, Samantha Thomas, Raya Noreault, Claire Thompson, and Katie Mable, for sharing their insights on the subject of loneliness and social isolation. Now, before we go, it's time for the NCSS Factoid of the Month. Even though the month of September serves as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, at NCSS, we want to make certain this topic is in the forefront 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Among the many specialty services made available to the community, NCSS offers prevention programs by facilitating mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid trainings In addition, we have adolescent services, community services, outpatient, crisis, and mobile crisis available in your time of need. NCSS provides confidential services and programs to individuals struggling with suicidal thoughts. NCSS is here for you with services to assist if you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts. You can call our crisis line at 524-6554. NCSS, you may not know us until you need us. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about all of our programs and services by logging on to ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Halko, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You.